And we're live.
This is Plant Daddies podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven.
So we were going to make today's topic into a mini plant profile, but when we kind of thought about it, we realized that these are so easy to care for that the cultivation information is basically just a non-issue, and we could sum it up in like one moderately long sentence.
Yeah, so instead we were going to do an episode where Matthew tries to convince me to care about the Pothos plant.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
So we're going to get back to that in a minute, but we've got some plant updates. Do you want to go first, Steven?
Sure. So I have kind of an exciting, weird plant update. So I have a couple ant plants in my house, and one of them has a kind of a larger caudex. So, there's a lot of different ant plants and different, plants that are symbiotic. These are kind of like, I guess I'm just going to make up the word, sort of truer ant plants. So this one's not Myrmecodia, but anyway, it's one of the ones that's kind of like that. It kind of has a fat caudex. Ants actually live inside there and will nest in it.
Well, what's really cool is that the caudex itself is naturally hollow with all of these chambers, though it's designed like an ant farm.
Yeah, so mine got a little dry spot kind of in the caudex, and then it basically opened an entry. It's crazy and really cool. I was like, oh, is this like getting drying out? Like, what do I need to do for the care? But it kind of flaked away, and now there's this entrance. So I'm actually kind of excited. I'm like, it's like you don't want ants, but then part of me is like,
I think that you should get a bunch of ants, and then you can have a little free-range formicarium in your home.
Yeah, that'll be really pleasant. Anyway, if anyone wants to look this up, the genus that I have, or at least the plant that I'm talking about, is Hydnophytum. Hydnophytum, I think. So I think that one is from Southeast Asia. I think many of them are, but anyway,
a really
it's kind
great
of a
way to remember that name is that the ants can hide, not fight them.
Wow.
Inside of the plant.
Did you just make that up?
Yeah. Okay. Dad jokes right here.
My God. All right. Anyway, how about you, Matthew? Let's move this right along for your sake.
Well, it is real gray and rainy in Seattle. In fact, it was thunder and lightning-ing earlier. So to kind of make myself feel better about that change of season, I have just been buying lots of orchids recently. I got two gorgeous ones from Miles' shop.
Okay.
And then he actually brought a third one over to me yesterday in person.
I love that convenient excuse you found. You're like, oh yeah, it's because of the weather.
Yeah, right? It's raining,
maybe
so
you
I
took
need
orchids.
orchids.
You took 3 weeks off from orchid purchases.
I
see you, but I won't tell anybody.
Well, now our listeners know.
But tens of listeners.
Yeah. In addition to the orchids, though, I just received in the mail today the Platycerium ridleyi that I have been waiting on. It has been sitting in the Los Angeles Customs for weeks, and now that it has arrived for me, it is a dried up husk. So, listeners, if any of you have any tips on what to do about that kind of situation, if you're importing plants and you have troubles with customs, even though you have the phytosanitation certificate and everything, pop us a line. Let me know, because this was a gorgeous plant. It was really large, and now it is dry and crispy. It might come back, but there's no growth on it now that is alive.
Yeah, I've heard some really crazy stories about importing plants like this. I was sharing with Matthew beforehand. This almost could be a mini episode. We could hear some. I mean, honestly, if you have crazy stories, reach out to us, like you said. I have a friend who tried to import some things, I think, thrice. Someone ended up taking care of his plants for him in Detroit. It had all these weird twists and turns. Anyway, so sorry to hear about that, Matthew. Do you think it's going to pull through?
Well, I was looking, and even though... So the shield fronds are completely brown, but they do that naturally, so I'm not too worried about them. There are two large branching fertile fronds that each have a little spore cup. This is a species that the spores aren't just produced on the backs of the leaves anywhere.
A spore cup, interesting.
Yeah, it's like a little spoon that it kind of has off to the side. So one of them is full of spores. So I might try my hand at doing some spore propagation and then just commit the next decade of my life to getting these plants sizable. But I think that...
I love that for you.
Yeah, thank you. But I think that what's probably going to happen is I'm going to just keep it moist and humid and bright light and hope that some new growth comes through, because it seems like the rhizome is still fine and that it has like some little like growth potential that might surprise me. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to get in contact with the seller and try to get in contact with customs to see like what happened there.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I don't import plants a lot, and the ones that I have imported, it's been easy. So yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts on this, or if you have a mature Platycerium ridleyi that you might want to send to a Plant Daddy, because I'm desperate for this plant. But that's enough about that.
Yeah, Matthew needs plants. He doesn't have enough plants. Okay?
I literally don't know how many we have in our apartment, but it's not enough. But anyway, before we dive into trying to convince Steven to like Pothos, which honestly, I don't even know if I'm going to do that.
I don't know if your heart's in it, but we can get to that.
Yeah. I just want to remind everybody that we can be found on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest as Plant Daddy Podcast, and online at plantdaddypodcast.com. You can also contact us by email at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com, and we would love it if you could go rate and subscribe, because that helps other listeners find us as well. One thing that I want to mention real quick is that if you have not been listening to On the Ledge, first off, what are you doing with your life? But second, we had the fantastic Jane Perrone on our last episode for an interview, and then she just released an episode that had us on talking about winterizing and getting ready for the colder, darker season when you can't leave your tropical plants outdoors.
Yeah, we really had a lot of fun making the episode, so definitely check it out if you have not yet, which I'm sure many of you have. I also wanted to mention too, we are trying out a new mic setup today, so
we
our
feel
voices,
fancy.
Our voices may sound a little bit different. And you know, our last mic just broke. Maybe we'll take that out.
Our last mic broke when we were recording with Jane, pretty much, and so we had a lot of fun audio editing to put together.
We had an incredible week. Okay, so there are a bunch of plants that we call pothos that we typically encounter. Just start me off here.
Okay, so yes, there are a bunch of plants, but there's one that we think of as pothos, that if you're talking about pothos, you're talking about Epipremnum aureum. And this is also called the Golden Pothos or Devil's Ivy. There's a lot of different names for it, but it's the variety that you're going to encounter basically anywhere that you find plants. It is a very, very easy, tried and true species that has multiple cultivars that thrive in offices and malls and hotels and like anywhere that you want a plant that'll look beautiful without care.
I would say you find it places where you don't find plants, okay? Like
that is true.
It's amazing quality, like cupboards or I don't know.
So the interesting thing about the Golden Pothos that I just want to get out of the way right now is that it is a flowering plant that just doesn't want to flower. The last time that it was seen blooming was a long time ago, and so every plant that we have now has been really amazingly propagated and mass produced through cuttings. So this is a plant that we were talking about how the Pilea peperomioides plant is not produced by seed. It's entirely done by clone propagation, basically, where you're just taking offshoots or stem cuttings. And that's the same with this one, because the variations of the colors for them, even if they did seed with their flowers, they wouldn't produce true to type typically. So if you have a variegated plant, the only way to keep that is to just vegetatively propagate the same one.
So these are bits that people have passed and passed and passed, right?
Yeah, like it's the same genetic plant. So we all have like, you know, the siblings.
Yeah, it's something very modern about that to me, like something very global, something mildly depressing about that maybe. I don't know.
Well, you say modern, but I think of it as being like quaint, because I think of the jade plant that I grow that is like a cutting of a cutting of a cutting that we can trace back to like tons of different people. I I don't know where the original came from, but mine's from my aunt. My aunt got it from a colleague. Her colleague got it from somebody else.
That's actually an interesting way. Yeah, that's true.
So you never really know the origin. But because these aren't seed propagated and they don't flower, how do you get those cultivars and mutations? It's the same species. It's very fascinating. And so I did some research, and it was sort of difficult because they don't really talk about this online a lot unless you're reading scientific journals. But what they have basically done with this poor plant is that they have basically subjected it to various like mutagens, like outside forces that'll promote and cause unexpected mutation in a plant. And the way that they kind of use this for culture in a greenhouse setting is they might take a standard pothos that you're familiar with, subject it to some sort of like gamma radiation, and then new growth that develops from the nodes that were irradiated may have their genes altered so that it's a different form or a different mutation. Then you separate this from the mother plant, and then you have the next horticultural jackpot. Yeah, because the whole point is like, oh, there's this tiny little baby shoot on this plant that looks different from the parent. Immediately put it on Instagram. Yeah, right? Cut it off, propagate it. In a shiny pot. Yep. Okay. So if you have some cesium lying around, don't do this at home. Don't call the, Yeah. So there have been a lot of different varieties that have been introduced into kind of the commercial plant market. The most common one, and what I call this at the top of the topic, is the Golden Pothos. And this is kind of your traditional standard variety. It has fairly heart-shaped leaves, at least when it's in its juvenile form. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it has the ability to grow quite large leaves if it's climbing. But so wait, so this Golden Pothos, what does this look like? Is this the one that has a little bit of yellow variegation? Yeah. Is this the one that's just like all green? This is the one that you see most often, I think. It is a deep green color that has like very, very plentiful, quite blotchy yellow variegation. Okay. In darker light, the variegation will reduce and the leaves might actually be mostly green. In very high light, they may have a lot more of the yellow. Okay. But it's a very like mottled, kind of large scale variegation, which is important because some of the varieties that they are able to mutate out of this plant are variations on this theme, but they are their own specific cultivars. Now, this is one that you'll find everywhere, but a common one that you'll also encounter that's quite similar is called Marble Queen. And she's similar in the colors, but the variegation is much more fine textured. So it's more like kind of like a little tapestry instead of like a splashy, like blotched painting. Okay. I don't know. Like, I may know these. You know, I'm like thinking back to various airports, where I would encounter this or something, and and the two plants look pretty similar, so if you're just comparing them side by side and they're grown in the same light, it might be apparent. But if you have plants that are growing in very different light situations, the variegation may end up looking similar. Okay. One that I particularly like because it's not variegated, if you recall our last episode, I went off on variegated plants, the Neon Pothos is very distinctive to me because it has the same heart-shaped leaves, but they are just uniformly bright chartreuse. It's like a lime green to me. And in lower light, it becomes more of a like lime green. In brighter light, it becomes more of a chartreuse yellow, but it's really nice. And so is that like a weak kind of, I mean, obviously not if it's everywhere, but like one of these variegated plants that, you have to be careful because it's not, this is not enough chlorophyll to like, create a healthy plant. It just looks so bright to me that. Yeah, there is definitely less chlorophyll, but from my experience growing them, perfectly fine. I happen to have this one in a very low light area and it's not really growing much, but that's totally fine because I have it in a little pot on a shelf and I don't want it to become huge and massive. So I found an area where it has enough light to grow new leaves and to be happy and do decently well, but it's not growing tons of vines. Okay. And it doesn't seem like it has any issue with the low light compared with the amount of chlorophyll in its leaves. All right. Now, if I was going to pick a variegated one, I want to just point out it's called Gentiana, and it's gorgeous because it is just mottled shades of green. So there's some dark green, some bright green, but it's all very simple. It's a very like kind of mute, delicate kind of appearance to it. But if you're a fan of white variegation, there are two varieties. One of them is Manhula, and the other one is Pearls and Jade. And these are the varieties that have the least yellow in their variegation. So if you want more of like a clean ivy-ish look, these are the two to go for. The thing to note about Pearls and Jade, which was actually developed at the University of Florida through one of these mutation processes, it has smaller leaves, kind of, and it's a little bit less robust than a lot of the more standard varieties. So that is an example of a plant that its variegation reduces its vigor. It's still a good, dependable houseplant. I personally think that it's hideous because I don't like that variegation the most. That's my least favorite.
But there are a lot of flavors to pick, it sounds like.
And like there's a flavor for every taste. Like if you don't like the standard one, there's something out there that you're going to enjoy. And the nice thing is that most of these are very easy to find. Most of them are going to command like the same low prices, because even if it's a cultivar that has a slightly less vigorous or aggressive growth habit, it's still going to be a fairly strong grower.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's basically what I want to say about the Golden Pothos. I think that if you were going to pick one of these, you'd have a hard time finding one that would fit your aesthetic, personally.
Yeah, you know, I guess it does sort of suggest to me that there are so many different types that maybe it's kind of worth a look. Or if I was going to gift somebody a plant, right, like somebody who maybe is intimidated or something like that, there might be something more interesting than the like circa 2000 dorm room plant that was kind of like one of 3 variegations.
Yeah, or like that one in a hanging basket with like 30-foot long vines that you just kind of tack on the wall.
That's like dusty and stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So what about, like I've been seeing this around your house, you've been talking about it a lot. What about Cebu Blue? That one looks like a different species. To me, it's a bit more appealing. Whatever. I'll tell you after what I really felt when I saw it.
I agree with you. It is so much more appealing. And it is a different species. This is not the Epipremnum aureum. This is Epipremnum pinnatum. And the cultivar specifically is Cebu Blue. I don't think that I've seen the straight species, so I don't know how much Cebu Blue varies from the type species.
Okay.
But what I love about this plant is that instead of being like ugly and variegated in that way that I don't like, but don't judge you if you do. It just has evenly colored leaves that are kind of like a dark, to me it's like a jade green. Like it's a very blue tinted green.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like the surface level of the leaf almost has a very faint kind of silvery powder blue. It's not quite an iridescence, but it almost gets there. So it's really striking when you have new foliage that's more of a bright green, older foliage that's matured to this kind of like blue, silvery color. To me, it's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And it picks up light
like,
beautifully.
As a skeptic here, like I think when I first saw it, I was like, oh, well, it's definitely not as blue as I thought. I was also mixing it up with another plant that I felt like was much bluer and sort of shimmery or something. But you're right, like there's kind of a blue, I would say, undertone or something. There's a different depth of
like
green,
a blue cast to it,
and it's definitely a bit more silvery. To me, the shape of the leaf is different, therefore it's like more appealing. It's smaller, and I feel it just feels a little bit more delicate or something.
Yeah, while the standard pothos can be a quite robust plant and the leaves are kind of a large heart shape to spade shape, the Cebu Blue, they're almost more like a really elongated like teardrop. It's not a terribly large leaf. They're narrower, and they kind of have like a rippled texture to them. So the whole plant together has a much daintier appearance than Epipremnum aureum.
It seems more fragile. Is there anything to that? Like it's just more.
I mean, it might be, but it's not more fragile in like its cultivation. It's another really dependable plant. When I first came across it was actually quite a while ago when I was building a vivarium. And the vivarium construction that I was doing, I was sourcing plants from like all over the internet. and I don't remember exactly which one of the online vivarium plant places that I found it at, but I bought like a little start, like a little cutting of it.
Was it expensive then?
I feel like it was more expensive than a good number of the other plants that I was looking at, but it wasn't so expensive that I decided to just skip it.
Okay.
But yeah, so like it was decently priced. It was fine. And I put it in the vivarium. It did fine. What it did was it grew up the back of the landscape, and it just very, very rapidly hit the top. It didn't grow out, didn't get bushy at all. And then when I tried to take cuttings of it to grow as a house plant, because they were acclimated to the really high humidity and consistent warmth of a vivarium setup, they just really failed to do anything. And I just kind of figured, well, that's fine. If I can't grow it out of a terrarium, this is like not an issue.
So wait, failed to do anything, but did not die. Like this is still epipremnum.
Yeah, like it.
So I just want to clarify. Have you discovered a way to kill them?
Well, let me say that the cuttings that I took from the terrarium grown plant did not make it. So yeah, like they didn't grow at all, and I was fine with that.
You should report this like to some center of learning.
Well, I was a young enough plant dad at that point that I probably just did something badly.
Okay, but I'm kind of hearing interesting pieces here. So it's like, all right, this, when you found it, it was not super expensive, so it was very like
but it wasn't cheap either.
Okay, but that to me that says kind of pre-fad.
It was also a plant at the time that they were like, this is a relatively new plant that you can't find most places. So like,
but they were like, oh, it's still this genus, so let's not kid ourselves. That's actually kind of interesting to me, right? Because it's like, oh well, I don't know, we don't know what we have, and people get caught up in like what's special and whatever. Like I do too, and that's just how this market works, I guess. But also, I was going to ask, like, what is the state of that fad now? I feel like it's kind of past specifically a little bit. Yeah, like it's kind of come and gone.
What's happened everywhere in the like, I don't know, 8 years or something since I built that vivarium, it has become much more widespread. And my first experience with it, trying to grow a really humid plant, suddenly shocking it into a drier home environment, was unfortunate, because if I had just grown that as a house plant from the beginning, I would have loved it. And everybody else has when they've done that. You can now buy them at Home Depot, I think.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, I'm saying this based on things that I've seen on Instagram. I've never seen it there, but it's not like the special rare plant that you have to order online anymore. It's something that you're seeing more and more regularly. And kind of in the way that a lot of these popular plants go, everybody wants one, everybody pays a ton of money for them, then suddenly like there's available stock and their popularity kind of crashes and the price falls. We're sort of at the point where their price is totally fair right now. Like you're not going to pay an arm and a leg for a plant that doesn't deserve it, but you're not going to find it anywhere that you go to look for a plant. So it's a nice balance. It's rarer than a lot of other common, easy house plants, but I mean, you can still find it, and you should actually. So the plant that I grow now, I got cuttings of from Miles, and he started them like with no intention of doing anything, just because he had them. He gave them to me. I just put them in a hanging basket in front of my east-facing window and tried to remember to water it enough, and it got a pretty regular.
So wait, you like gave this light?
Yeah, this plant actually got some light. Like it actually got a spot that has a fair amount of light.
Okay, but it shouldn't need that.
It doesn't, but it grows best when it has it.
Okay.
So, sense, yeah, what I found, though, was that it was really happy if it got to dry and then water. And so if I noticed a wilt, I'd give it some water. And the way that it blessed me with its happy placement in my apartment was by growing really, really long vines. Like, it's hanging above my head level. Like, I have to hold the watering can above my head to get it. And I just cut the vines off when they reach the floor, and then I chop them up for propagation.
Wow.
Yeah. So
okay, I've not seen that in your place. Interesting.
Well, it's hidden among all the other hanging plants. It is a really dependable variety, and it's like probably my favorite of the pothos plants.
Okay, so you're also growing a newer species that you said is a bit more rare, a bit more like a peace lily, which is kind of interesting.
And what else is interesting about this is that there is not much information about it.
This could tempt me.
Yeah, so this is Epipremnum amplissimum, and It's a plant that I also got from Miles. Thank you, Miles, for keeping me in stock of good plants.
This is Miles from the plant store.
Yeah, I feel like this is a plant that he gave to me, and I was like, okay, I'll grow it. And so he gave me a cutting that didn't look very special. It was in a pot, well, actually just a plastic drinking cup.
Yeah, you showed me. Didn't look special. I'll confirm that.
Yep, it just basically looked like one of the more lance leaf shaped anubias that you'd plant in an aquarium or a wet vivarium setting, or it looked like a peace lily that decided to vine instead of grow in a rosette kind of clump. And I just wasn't that thrilled about its prospect, so I put it under my orchid lights in a corner that I didn't have to really worry about it much, and kept it watered occasionally when I'd remember. And this is another plant that would dry hard, and then I'd be like, oh, it wilted way too much, I need to give it a drink. So it was really durable, and it grew a ton. So you actually see pictures on our Instagram if you look. I potted it up and gave it a moss pole. Well, actually, it's a coconut fiber pole. But regardless, I gave it a support to grow up. And since I potted it that way, it very, very quickly grew taller than the pole. And it wasn't growing a lot of roots into it. It was just growing very happily straight upwards.
Okay.
So last week, I actually cut it back. And I cut kind of the whole length of the plant. I chopped into thirds so that I could then just tuck 2 cuttings next to the existing rooted one down in the moss. And it's using like a kind of typical like coarse jungly tropical plant mix with sphagnum moss on top.
Yeah, and then like also not that should matter, right, for this whole genus a little bit.
I think it'll be fine. Like I didn't use any rooting powder. I didn't root them in advance. I just cut them off, and then I didn't even poke a hole. I crammed them into the soil.
Okay.
So
severe damage that they're recovering from.
I was aware that perhaps that's not the best way to do that, of course, but I figured that it would probably be fine. And so far they seem okay. I think that I'm going to end up getting a plant now that has more dense growth, and I'm really excited to share some cuttings with people, because after it grew larger, I started to notice that the leaves were much more interesting than I'd originally thought. It is very kind of peace lily-esque, but they sort of have a bit of a silvery sheen to the younger leaves. Like it's very subtle, but it's enough that if they're among other green plants, like they kind of stand out a bit. It's like the really low-key version of glitter.
Is this one easy to find?
Nope, it's not. You can find it, of course. Like I know that Josh's Frogs sells it, and they note on their webpage exactly what I was discovering when I was trying to research it myself. There's not much information about them around. Like if you go into Dave's Garden, which is another one of my favorite online sources, there's like no information except for one comment that just says that it's a little bit fussy about light. And like, I haven't found that.
Okay.
I think that I've grown it in a bright place and in a medium low light place, and it's just fine in either of them. And I think it could take lower light and still be fine.
I mean, it can take smashing into soil.
Yeah, like it's like cutting off someone's finger and ramming it into some dirt and hoping a new person grows.
But
it is definitely a really interesting plant that's new on the market that I think that people should keep their eye out, because it is definitely a unique and very easy plant. It doesn't look at all like the Pothos that you know and might love.
Yeah, it's a different look.
Yeah.
All right, so there's one more we wanted to cover. This is the most different, possibly the most appealing to me.
Ooh, which one is that?
Satin Pothos.
Okay.
Silver Satin Pothos, one of those.
Well, I was about to correct you that it is not an actual epipremnum, but you didn't call it an epipremnum. You called it a pothos, so I'm going to give you a slide. It used to be considered epipremnum, but the way that science goes, things are always moved and shuffled around, and this is super duper true of all of the aroids that grow as extremely similar looking vining, trailing, climbing plants. So while it was once in that family, it is now in Scindapsus. So Scindapsus pictus is the species. And It is very similar to these other ones. I kind of think that it's almost like a cross between like Cebu blue and a heartleaf philodendron in a lot of ways, because the leaves are heart-shaped, but they're asymmetrical. Like, it's a little bit bigger on one side. And there are different varieties of this that have been cultivated, and there's a lot of kind of confusion about their names, because one of them is commonly called Satin Pothos, and the other one is often called Silver Philodendron. Neither of those names are accurate, but it doesn't matter. The Satin Pothos happens to be the one that I grow. And this is, let's see, I think that the variety, I don't know how to say this, so I'm sorry. Argyraeus.
Yeah, that's gonna be easy to Google.
Yeah, but the variety is spelled Argyraeus. So however you say that.
Wait, that's the species name?
Well, that's the cultivar.
Oh.
The species is Scindapsus pictus, but the one that we call Satin Pothos is that name I won't say.
Okay.
And then the one that we call Silver Philodendron is actually a variety called Exotica. But they're both just cultivars of the same plant. And this I'm just speculating, but this could be plants collected at different sites or plants that showed a different morphology in the wild that were collected. What they have in common is their kind of dark, solid green leaves that have that asymmetrical heart shape. But what makes them different is how they do their really beautiful silver mottled patterning on the leaves. It's kind of like that glimmery sort of variegation that you see sometimes on begonias and stuff, where it almost looks sparkly. And in the Satin Pothos, which is the Argyraeus.
Okay, you know what? I found it. I'm going to say Argyraeus.
Okay, so Argyraeus. That's much
my
nicer.
guess.
So Argyraeus, it's more of like a blotchy kind of patterning where like the dots connect a lot and it's more even.
Okay, so this is kind of like variegation, blotchy patterning.
Yeah.
This is not like triggering variegation
Well,
hatred for
because
you.
it's not that like fucking hideous yellow shit that looks like disease.
Okay. All right.
And it's also not white to make it look like a silk flower in your grandma's china hutch. Sorry, I actually haven't smoked my jewel in a while.
Specific traumas we're running through here.
Yeah. But then the silver philodendron, which is exotica, that one, the silver variegation is actually like much more discrete dots. So it's a little bit begonia-esque. Like if you think about angelwing begonias with their like dotted kind of patterning, this reminds me a lot of that. But what I love about this particular, I'm just going to call it a pothos, even though it's not an epipremnum.
Hey, we're using Pothos Big Tent term here.
Yeah,
that's
true.
fine.
So non-scientific pothos. What I love about this one is that it is really good in low light. And
But they're all really good in low light.
Right, but this one's pretty and it's good in low light.
Okay.
So
like it will retain its blotches and everything.
Well, actually, I don't think that it loses the blotches.
Okay.
Some variegated plants,
yeah, like if they don't have a lot of light, right?
Yeah.
You won't get that expressed.
Now,
maybe.
this is one of those moments where Stephen and I have to say, we're hobbyists, and we don't have scientific training in this, so if you know more about this than we do, please let us know, because I'm going to speculate here. Variegation that is, like, internal into the leaf, like in the Epipremnum aureum that's yellow, I think that goes away under lower light. Like, the new leaves grow in with more chlorophyll, whereas a plant that has this, I'm going to call it like a pseudo variegation, like calatheas and begonias and these pothos are all examples that I can think of in my head, where it seems to be more of like a cellular structure in the leaf that is refracting the light differently, and that's why it appears glittery.
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at, and that seems right to me. I mean, and I think you know more about this. We're kind of riffing off this like blind deleting the blind tangent here a little bit, but
this is an invite for people to let us know if you have more information, and we'll research this later so that we can give you a better understanding of plant variegation. Yeah,
so anyway, this one, whatever, it will retain these.
I haven't seen any difference in brightly grown plants versus dimly lit plants.
All right.
And I have a couple of them in different spots in my apartment. One of them is sitting on a shelf in my dining room, and it's just kind of like hanging down, getting almost no direct light. It's just kind of the ambient light through my sliding glass door onto the balcony. But the way that the sun and building are angled, I don't think that ever gets sunlight on it. And it's doing well. It looks happy. It's growing like yards and yards of vine that I trim off periodically when they reach the floor and the rabbits can eat it. The other one that I have is hanging exclusively lit by grow lights, kind of by my TV, and similarly, it is growing like down onto the floor. So I have like 3, like maybe 12-foot long vines that I'm total. I think it's total. It's more than 12 feet. But anyway, I've got a lot of plant material that I'm going to be propagating soon.
So this is like enough to poison any house cat in like a neighbor feud, or something.
Yeah. Okay, so the next time my neighbor's cat pisses me off,
it's a lot of material.
Feed that plant to the cat. No, that's not true.
Okay.
So yeah, these are like the 4 varieties of pothos that I think you're going to be hearing about, whether it is in the future or now. I think they're all really great for different reasons and for different situations.
Okay, so I'll just say, when I was reading about these, I found some interesting tidbits. I really have never looked into this, genus or any of these genera.
None of these are plants that Stephen would jump at.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of worth dwelling on some of these. All right, so for the Golden Pothos, it's from a tiny island in Polynesia called Moria next to Tahiti. I just think it's really strange to think it's from this tiny place. It's now everywhere. I just kind of assumed that this was like from Borneo and this was, a kind of noxious weed from there or something like that. Something different, not like from a tiny place and now it's like taken over the world.
Just one small island.
Yeah, so it's also interesting to sort of note that these are invasive in a lot of tropical environments. So Florida and Puerto Rico and the United States. And apparently they will climb up trees, kind of choke these trees. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Matthew, but...
Yeah, so when I was looking at kind of the variety of pothos that's available, they specifically mentioned the Golden Pothos, and I think that's because it's the most like vigorous and aggressive one of them.
But it's also interesting to see that like the ones that we have in our homes, they're never mature, so to speak. Right?
Yeah.
You only have this juvenile growth. So you look for these invasive stories. Like if you just Google invasive pothos, you'll see some of their adult growth where these massive leaves that are kind of like have more fenestrations or splits or something, right?
But they're significantly bigger.
They're so huge.
In fact, I bet if you were to look at a mature pothos plant, I don't think that you would recognize that it was Epipremnum aureum. They look so different when they're mature.
And, I still don't like it, but it is a little bit interesting to see.
Yeah, but a lot of places note that if you live in zones like 10 and warmer, that you should not use this plant outside because it is substantially problematic when it doesn't get killed off by the winter.
So there's that. Also, apparently it cannot flower without chemicals. I'm just reading my notes actually. Okay, no. So it cannot flower due to genetic impairment.
Yeah,
but,
it like has some weird mutation.
Yeah, it can be sprayed with stimulant to do so apparently.
That
sounds like if you want the very unattractive flower, it's not. You can Google it and look. It's not worth, like, you're not missing anything. And this was the best part. Okay, so so we're in Seattle at the University of Washington. They're developing a type of Golden Pothos that I guess is kind of infused. I don't know if that's the right word. Infused with rabbit proteins. So this is a Pothos rabbit hybrid.
Are they using,
in my mind?
Are they using like CRISPR gene editing to insert bits of rabbit?
It didn't
genome?
sound like that, but I read the Seattle Times article that was not very scientific. Like I was actually looking for the proper verbs here.
Okay.
And they really danced around it, and they kind of said this like in a paragraph. It kind of sounded like they're like, oh well, you take the pothos and you kind of like steep it in these rabbit proteins, and then like as the pothos grows, it retains some. It just didn't sound very like robust as far as a scientific explanation. Anyway, so
why are they doing this?
So the punchline here, like they're doing this to absorb more harmful chemicals and clean the air more effectively than the normal pothos. And I guess there's stories like a pothos will clean your air. It can clean 1% of like the formaldehyde or something in the air.
Yeah, but pothos is definitely noted as being one of the better plants for improving indoor air quality.
Okay, but yeah, and these ones were like supercharged though. So they were put in these chambers with chloroform and benzene. Okay, so these I feel like are kind of, in the zeitgeist of like bad things that we shouldn't have in our homes, right? Okay, so this is like already set for great marketing. So chloroform dropped by 82%, benzene dropped by 75% in these closed chambers that the pothos was growing in.
What did their standard like control plant
I don't
do?
know what the standard rates were, but I thought it was like sub 10% in the scanning that I did. Yeah, this is very scanned, so if
So this
there's
is
any
also
correction.
like perhaps a little bit tangential, but I just heard actually I think it was on Jane Perone's show, an episode where they were talking about plants and indoor air quality, and that NASA study that we've talked about, that was done in the 80s, and the guy totally overinflated like how well these plants do. And something that he left out entirely, and that has absolutely not really been touched on by anybody talking about indoor plants improving your air quality, is that they mostly only do this with extremely high light levels. Like at the upper range of the plant's light tolerance, that's when you'll actually see something happen to improve your air quality. Because it's all like respiration. It's like their process of respiration, and if they don't need to be respiring much because they don't have enough light to photosynthesize very much.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's a lot of holes in this article I'm reporting as well. But you can search the article. We can link to it like in our post or something. But apparently it's been approved for sale in Canada already, and I guess here they're kind of testing it to make sure it's not more invasive than the version that we already have. But
are they worried about that, or are they worried about the consumers being like, GMOs? I'm scared of science.
I'm sure that's
and
part
I don't
of it.
understand.
I'm sure that's part of it. Or
Okay.
anyway, so like this is approved for sale in Canada. So yeah, maybe look for that. I don't know, but that's this is kind of a home. Yeah, it's kind of like a hometown story, and I mean maybe a pothos that I would be interested in, just knowing it's like cleaning all the benzene. Anyway.
Yeah, but I feel like if I was going to have them put rabbit genes into a pothos to make my air quality better, I wish that they'd done it with Jasenia, which is that beautiful like mottled green one, instead of the yellow one.
Well, you can wait for the next round.
I'll just walk over to the UW one day and be like, dudes,
you did it all wrong.
What is your aesthetic?
Okay, so
that's cool though.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, there's a rabbit tie-in. I thought you would be you'd be into that.
I'm wondering if I just let my rabbits eat my pothos, will their protein get on the plant?
I'm sure that's the same, Matthew.
Yeah, this sounds...
That's how it was done.
Yeah, this sounds totally like what their process was.
Anyway, amateur hobbyist scientists, okay. Okay, so do we like these? You've done all that work talking about it, kind of like trying to convince me. All right, I'll go first. Okay, so for me, I think it's kind of psychological, and maybe that's been a theme through some of these episodes, but for me, it reminds me of like laundromats. It reminds me of sort of dark, like
sad
church.
places.
Yeah, like a church basement social center or something. Somewhere it's like it belongs to no one.
I always think like
thing.
malls and dentist's office.
Mm-hmm. Or I'm thinking a lot too about like this as kind of a manifestation of apathy a little bit. I'm like, okay, if somebody gets this, like, you buy it, you go into it knowing you don't care a little bit. Okay, not all of them, right? But I just feel like it's much more likely with this plant, right? Or someone, they're kind of saying that they're not very confident, and they're watering that lack of confidence, and it just grows and grows.
Okay, that's an
So
interesting
I feel like
perspective.
There's that aspect to it. Okay, but on the other side, I'm very glad, and this sounds really patronizing. I don't mean it that way, and I'm going to try to not make it sound this way, but it's like,
okay.
It's good that there's a plant like this that if I wanted to get someone to be like, oh, hey, I'm going to start you on plants or something, I could be like, hey, why don't I get you this? And you can kind of demonstrate all the functions, right? You're like, oh, hey, you can do this. Like, oh, it will totally survive that. Don't you worry. You know what? You overwatered it this time, but don't. It's going to be fine. Or you know what? You wanna like see how it could root in water. Okay, plunge it in. I don't know, a lake for like 12 months.
Okay, don't
survive.
do that.
Like, okay, but I'm saying it's so kind of
That's not how you
forgiving. It's so like
propagate.
malleable. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying like it can do so much, but I just think like.
But that it provides so little.
Well, I just feel like if you stop to think about it, I'm like, hey, we can do so much better. There's so much more interest.
So
in this
times that I have
than
bought
that.
plants for people that I'm like, you're probably going to kill this. Instead of giving them pothos, I always give them ZZ plant, because I think that is...
I would choose ZZ plant over pothos. Yeah.
Which is another aroid.
Oh, is it?
Isn't it?
ZZ Plant?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one's on you.
I'm going to look that up while I'm talking, but I'm pretty sure that's an aroid. I'm going to be real disappointed if it's not, and I might have to edit that out. But
yeah, so okay, so like for you, Matthew, why do you have multiple like pothos plants in your homes, like or in your home? What are you doing with it, or what happened where you're like you ended up at the store and you bought it?
Okay, so Steven just shared his like psychological profile about this plant, and here's mine. I definitely had one years ago. I got cuttings from one of my mom's friends, and it was one of my favorite plants because I had it in a really pretty pot that my aunt gave me, and like it was long and drapey, and it gave me #jungle vibes before that was a thing, and it really tolerated the abuse of like a preteen keeping a plant way far away from a windowsill, and it grew really nicely. But what I ultimately didn't like about it was that it was just one long lanky mess that occasionally I would try to like pile back up into the pot, and then like it would continue to spill out. But I got rid of it when I reached a point where it was just like this tangled Christmas light kind of scenario. And
it did everything you asked and more.
Yeah.
What does get rid? You just threw it out?
I don't remember what happened to it.
Well, that's the story of Pathos. No one remembers, right?
Yeah.
Like, I had one. I don't remember where it came from, where it went.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, by now it is well documented. I don't like variegated yellow plants. I just don't like that.
Was it one of those?
Yeah, it was definitely one of those. And that was the point where I had only a few plants to my name. So any of them were special to me. But yeah, like that was my first one, and I just kind of thought, you know, there's a lot of better things out there. Like everything is better out there. So I have focused all of my efforts onto everything except for Pothos. But I have this one spot in my apartment that it is on top of the orchid light shelf that I have in my living room. It is adjacent to a window but gets no light from it. It is far enough away from the like full spectrum grow lights that I have hanging to illuminate the room and let a lot more plants grow than the light would reach from outside. Like it's so far from all of the light sources that nothing will really happily grow there. And it's very close to the ceiling, so I can't like put a grow light over it without that grow light then shining in the eyes of anybody sitting on the couch. So I just said to myself, this is why Pathos exists.
Did you pay for it?
Yeah.
Wow.
I sadly got in the car. I was probably weeping softly as I resigned myself to this. And I went down to City People's down in Madison Valley.
Okay.
And I bought a decent Pothos, brought it home, put it on that shelf, watered it, and just thought to myself, okay, well, that's at least green.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is...
But I felt sort of defeated because I tried several other plants there. I had tried lots of other options and ideas. I, for a while, was just like rotating plants through that space, knowing like, you're going to die up here eventually, but I'll catch it in time. And the problem also was that it's a really warm spot because it is basically like an elevated plywood box. And at the time it had T5 fluorescent tubes inside of it.
Like throwing off heat.
Yeah, so it needed to be watered constantly because it was also a huge pot, or it was a huge plant in a small pot. Okay. So it was drying very quick, and it was like limping over and just being very wilted. So it was very dramatic, and at least it reminded me to water it because it needed watering far more regularly than I expected.
So it sounds like you have these in hard to reach spots.
Yeah. Hard to reach.
Or not hard to reach, like hard to cultivate.
Yeah, like these are the plants that I tuck around all of the areas where I'm like, well, I can't put something pretty here.
Okay.
So I'll put this.
So you're also trying this on moss poles, or did I mishear that? Is this just a good one for moss poles?
I'm trying the Epipremnum amplissumum on a moss pole.
Okay, so that was the kind of peace lily-ish, a little bit harder to find one.
It's kind of different, and it's interesting, and I just wanted to kind of try out what that one would do. It also seems like it's more of an upright grower, whereas like the Golden Pothos can be very
it's an everything
like trailing.
grower.
Yeah, like It'll grow mature leaves if you let it climb, but it has to be climbing for a while before it'll grow those large
But,
leaves.
I was thinking, like, this may be a good plant, right, to try if you want to try a moss pole, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's also a lot of other plants to try on moss poles.
That's the story of Pothos. There's a lot of other plants.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I'm
like...
saying, should you find yourself only having access to Pathos?
And something that I'm going to say about Pothos is that they are often sold on moss poles, but...
Oh, really?
Here's like the little chip on my shoulder about moss poles. They're trendy right now. They're kind of having this moment.
Totally.
It is not... Well, you can do it this way, but to me, it's not the best approach to just, like, take some hanging basket Pothos that you buy at Home Depot, put it in a pot, cram a moss pole in it, and then just, like, wrap the plant around it. Like, you've just basically constructed, like, some weird faux topiary, and it's fine. Like, it'll look... If that's what you're going for, like, it'll look like what it looks like. And it's totally a reasonable way to get the plant to grow. It'll be fine and happy. It's different from just, like, hanging out loose all over the edges of a hanging basket or, like, trailing across a dresser or something.
Yeah.
But I think if you were going to do it right, you would want to start a small plant at the base so that very quickly, before there's much growth, it knows that it can climb, because the best climbing plants for moss poles are ones that, like, root themselves onto it and know that they're secure, and then they start growing better leaves. And so the juvenile forms of all of these plants that we're talking about as Pothos, they all look kind of the same. They're all nice. They're fine. They have long internodes between their leaves because they're in their trailing stage. But like we've talked about in other episodes, a lot of these trailing aroids that grow as vines do this so that they can find something to climb. And then once they hit it, they start, like, racing up it. The internodes become shorter because it's not vining anymore. It grows mature leaves that are larger. So if you're going to grow something on a moss pole, pick, like, a Monstera or, like, a Monstera Adamsonii, because it's a small, manageable plant that has beautiful juvenile leaves, but they become spectacular when they're mature. And it can do that within, like, a reasonable length moss pole in your home. Whereas if you have a Pothos, it's going to take much more time. You probably don't want to start out with some little baby cuttings of Pothos around the base, the way that you could do with an Adamsonii or any of the other ones. Yeah.
You know, and I guess I see this more as, like, all right, you have a Pothos, what do you do with it? Or maybe you want to do something new with it. I'm just saying, like, it might be an option for that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
In my personal opinion, the best way to do Pothos of all of these varieties that we're talking about, except for Amplicium, which is not so much a trailing plant, is to just find some high space that you can't access very easily. And so watering is fine if you manage to do it occasionally, but, like, get it somewhere that there's not a great amount of light, that nothing else will live, because it'll just grow these beautiful vines hanging down. And I think that's the plant at its best advantage indoors. I think that you can do that thing that I've seen where people will grow a densely planted pot of them near a wall and then kind of, like, train them up the wall. And in fact, Miles has done this in his shop.
Yeah, he has a really huge one.
Yeah.
Is that one plant?
Well, it's a bunch of cuttings in a pot.
Okay.
Yeah, like, one plant is a vine. Like, if there's a lot of vines, it's multiple plants. They don't tend to branch that way. But he is doing a Cebu Blue next to his Neon Pothos, and they're very happy. I think that he uses, like, some thumbtacks to the sides of the vine to kind of hold it in place. It'll grow some aerial roots to kind of help its, like, mount onto the wall a bit, but you definitely do have to help it, I think, indoors to stay on. And that can look nice. It's not something that I particularly like, and I have so much art and other things on my walls that I don't really...
Yeah, but, you know, I don't know, living walls, like, people are trying to do that a lot right now.
Yeah,
That
but maybe
used to
don't
be
do
like
it in the drywall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like, just for the safety and construction of your home.
This is 4 miles right now. Okay.
Yeah. Well, no, it looks great in his shop.
Yeah.
I don't have the wall space to devote to that because I'm already doing that with Eryphidophora.
But no, you're right. You shouldn't necessarily do that into drywall where you're watering it.
Well, do whatever you want. I mean,
well, you just said not to.
Well, so plants that grow their roots, like, into a structure like ivy are damaging. Plants that grow their roots, like, on a structure like orchids or pothos or monstera, they're less damaging, and you can like pull it off and it might peel some paint, but it's not going to like grow into the wall and like, you know. Anyway, that's not really what we're talking about. But I think that these plants are all best if you have a lot of them in the same pot, so that you have a lot of vines. You can prune them back however you need. So they're good with trailing. They're good with climbing if you give them the support. There's a lot of ways that you can do them. I think that the most interesting thing that I've been doing recently, though, has been my propagation techniques, because...
Well, you could propagate this like any way.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, there's a few methods that work.
Maybe not hot sand, but like everything else.
Pack the plant under very hot sand.
Turn microwave on self-clean.
Yeah. You have a self-clean function on your microwave?
Oven. I meant oven. Okay.
So, damn, how bad is your microwave? So what I've been doing, I saw this technique on Instagram, and it totally blew my mind. And I just initially was like, wait, that seems so risky. You're going to waste all that plant material. And then as soon as I tried it, I was like, oh my God, why have I not been doing this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
In water?
Single node propagation. So instead of just taking like one rooted vine and putting it in some soil, because what you'll end up with then is one vine in soil.
Yeah.
And they also tend to lose their older leaves. So then you'll have like a naked vine that just has like growth on the end, and it's not going to be an attractive houseplant. So what I've been doing is when I cut back those yards and yards of like vine material from these plants, I just take cuttings where they're each about like 1.5 inches long with a single node and leaf in the center. And this way, each cutting that I've made has usually like a little root nub for like an adventitious root, and it has a dormant like growth point at the base of the leaf. So what I've been doing is a few different approaches. I have either sewn these directly into wet sphagnum moss so that they're tucked about like 1 inch below the sphagnum. I can keep it pretty moist, but they still get air so they won't rot, but they'll get enough moisture that they won't dry out. Each little leaf like sticking out the top of the surface of the sphagnum. And then what happens is really kind of amazing. This has been great with the Cebu Blue. The Satin Pothos has done this as well. Each of those nodes just kind of like activates and like pokes its way out, grows a leaf, and then it becomes its own vine. And then they root down into the sphagnum. For some of these, I have just been rooting them in like a temporary like glass of wet sphagnum. Others I've been doing in like a closed vessel pot with leca pellets, that expanded clay, and then the sphagnum on top. And that way I can grow them kind of in that passive hydroponics method where you're just like keeping a vessel kind of a little bit full of water, and the roots are all growing into lightweight, like airy, expanded clay.
Okay, so I'm sorry, my mind is still kind of blown. Like, I know these existed in your house. You're like kind of into them. You're trying all these propagation techniques now?
That's because I want to give them away. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I've never been huge on propagation.
Yeah.
And here's my story with propagation. When I was a kid, it was so exciting to try to grow African violets from cuttings and, you know, Ficus benjamina from cuttings.
So this is actually like more connected to propagation baggage, is what you're saying.
Yeah, like I was really into that when I was a child without like my own spending money to go buy myself the plants that I would have wanted. So instead I was just like taking cuttings of tons of stuff and trying different propagation techniques. And because I was as learned as like an 8-year-old can be on these topics pre like broad use of the internet, I was moderately successful sometimes.
Microsoft Encarta kind of era.
Yeah, exactly. I loved that program. Instead of playing video games, I just read Encarta. I'm not even kidding. But what I kind of grew frustrated with was that plants that I was propagating were so slow. They just kind of never seemed as nice as the plant that they came from. It would take so long for something to become like a decent plant that it just seemed like it was not worth the effort.
So you're trying to correct that now with these pothos.
Well, basically, I just spent years being like, fuck it, I'm just going to go buy a mature plant or a young enough plant that I can grow up quickly. But I want that immediate impact because I'm a millennial and I want things to be perfect right now. I don't want to have to wait for a pothos to become dense and bushy from like a 3-leaf cutting.
Okay.
So what you can do is all these different methods that I've been trying out to see how I can get back into the propagation game and spread some of the plants that I have to friends or family or
That's
listeners.
actually kind of true. Now that I'm thinking, you don't propagate things a lot.
Nope.
Wow.
Sometimes I divide them, but my whole thing with plants is usually like buy a gorgeous giant ficus, put it in your living room, and keep it looking amazing.
So I feel like we've uncovered a whole secret part of your life right now. Okay,
the fact that I would much rather just like buy a whole size.
Oh no, your
like,
secret experiments to propagate the pothos.
Yeah.
Okay, under cover of night or something. Like I haven't really seen these. I guess I have seen them.
Have
around,
you noticed
that
there are like a dozen cocktail glasses full of little like
I don't know
pothos and philodendron
I don't know
cuttings?
this pothos. Okay, I don't.
Okay, so
Okay,
Steven
but
is
the
like
thing
literally
is, like,
blind.
Yeah, but okay, wow, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so fine. What's the winner so far?
Well, I've been the most aggressive with Cebu Blue because it's my favorite of them. It's hands down the
Okay,
prettiest.
so with Cebu Blue, which method?
Well, I found that they're all kind of equivalent.
Oh.
Like,
Oh my god.
yeah. So
Okay, well that's the theme here.
the method
the
that,
theme of the Pothos show is like
yeah,
it's all easy,
it all
doesn't
works.
matter.
It all works,
Yeah,
and there's always a better plant
just
anyway.
water it once a year.
Yeah. No, they need much more frequent watering than that.
Joking.
It's not a Lithops. But what I found is that I don't love rooting them just in straight water. If you just put them in a glass of water, it gets scummy, dead bugs fall in it. I have a lot of fruit flies right now, so maybe that's not true for you. But like, it's fine, but things get scummy, and I find that the roots will occasionally rot if there was some like already grown adventitious roots, and you're trying to get it to grow like water roots so that you can. But anyway.
So you're saying in some kind of moss or some kind of medium.
Yeah, I have definitely found that to be the best way to go. So I have been combination like pure moss, tucking them into that, leca below, a little bit of moss, cuttings, more moss. I think that that's the method to go with. I'm super happy with it. And so I just hacked up my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, which I know that I've been promising you a cutting of for a long time, and you finally have one now.
Yeah.
So you're welcome.
Oh, thank you.
But what I did with the plant that came from is I just cut it up into tons of one node cuttings.
Okay, but that's not a pothos, just so people know, right?
No. This is another aroid. And actually the reason that I mentioned the Rhaphidophora specifically is because Epipremnum amplicium, I believe, used to be considered a Rhaphidophora.
So, Matthew, are these here to stay? Kidding.
Yeah, I think that we know the answer to that. They are the cockroach of the plant world, or at least indoor plants or in Florida. No, but so actually here's my honest assessment of these. I think that there are enough varieties in both like the Epipremnum family and also like just outside of that plants called Pothos. I think that everyone can find one of these that'll work for them, and I think that they are really fantastic for environments that are not very like hospitable to other plants.
Yeah, so many other plants, and I really feel like I know it's kind of like dark and, you know, like my psychological wonderings or something before, but I really appreciate these for the reasons that you're saying, right?
Yeah, that's why I appreciate them. And honestly, like, we're probably sounding a little bit like snooty about our plants because we are sort of looking down on the pothos. So I do want to make it known that this is indeed a great plant, and if you love them, that is spectacular because this is a plant that'll love you back and never flower, but that's fine because it'll continue to grow happy. And they are very dependable. They are varied enough that even if you dislike some kinds of variegation like I do, there's another kind out there.
Yeah,
and
tons of variety. You know,
Yeah.
you have them now. I'm sure I will have them again.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you're a new plant interested person, I think that this is a really wonderful one to start with. If you're looking for some kind of draping, vining, jungly plant, well, first I'd point you to the heartleaf philodendron. Then I'd point you to like one of the varieties that we're calling pothos. I think that Cebu Blue and the Satin Pothos are spectacular and very, very beautiful, but I think there's a lot of great varieties in the Golden Pothos as well. Now, I think that it's a plant that often gets looked down on by people with more experience or by people who are like actively trying to import plants from Thailand that are dead when they arrive. But there is still a spot in a collection that is like more of a like connoisseurs plant grouping for these, because you will always have a spot that you can't grow something that you really care about in. And so adding a pothos or 5 to these difficult to grow spots is a really fantastic way to just give some color, give some texture, just give some backdrop for better plants to stand off against. Like, genuinely, I enjoy all of the pothos plants that I have. None of them are in areas that are terribly prominent, but they all add something to the overall landscape of my #urban jungle. And I think that it would be a shame to miss out on that, because I have some like elitist attitude when I'm shopping for plants and I just look them over entirely. I think that this is a plant that is underappreciated, even though there are so many plants that do everything that a pothos does, but slightly better.
Yeah, and
except for survive. The pothos will survive when a lot of other things won't.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I'm glad they exist. I mean, like I've said.
Yep.
I don't have one currently, but
I will probably get him some, because I have pots and pots and pots
it
of
sounds
these things
like
propagating.
It. Yeah.
And I'm going to need to be potting up my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma cuttings, which I'm doing the same method of propagation that I talked about before. So I'll let you know how that goes. But something that I think is important is sharing plants that you love with other people. So a lot of people I know are probably going to be getting some Cebu Blue pretty soon.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So this has been Plant Daddy Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you enjoy what you've heard, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends. And if you ever want to be in touch, you can always email us at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com or check out our social media, all of which can be found at Plant Daddy Podcast. We are looking forward to tuning in next time. So thank you for listening and happy growing.
All right, go water your pothos plants, or your aunt's pothos,
yeah,
or your grandma's, or
you could also just let it be dry.
Your uncle's.
That's fine.
Yeah, just at your leisure.
It'll still survive.
Bye.